We're live, but first I want to ask everyone joining us, which there should be people trickling in. If you were joining us, what band got you through your teenage heartbreak? Now you have to tell me, Tara. Who was it?
Oh gosh. So I was either gonna go Blackstreet before I let go,
Mm-hmm.
but also Babyface's when will I see you again? When can I see you? Yes, I'm old. All of my R&B references are old. Sorry.
Please, I love Mariah Carey more than anyone on this earth. My number one artist in this world is Mariah Carey. Sarah, what about you?
I'm gonna switch genres. I had to actually Google the name of the song, but the guy's name's Ryan Starr. He's an American singer-songwriter, like more in the rock sort of department. And the song is called Losing Your Memory.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go Google that. Oh man, the comments are coming in, and we got a few Lana more things.
About Gloria Gaynor, and absolutely, I Will Survive.
Yes.
That kind of pumps you up. Yes, Kate JoJo, absolutely. Why didn't I say Jodeci? Oh my gosh, I should have said Jodeci.
I'm seeing a lot of Jack's Mannequin, and I just have to say, I almost wore my signed T-shirt from when I met him when I was 16, and I'm also seeing him in June. My best friend and I are going to see the Jack's Mannequin reunion tour, so lots of
Well, someone said the Spill Canvas. Shout out to you, friend. That is another name that I haven't heard in a while that I would have had to Google.
Boys to Men, yeah, that was on the tip of my tongue for sure. Okay,
I was crying way too much to Boys to Men, like inappropriate age, had never known love, and I was like crying to Boys to Men. Like, what was wrong with me?
Okay.
Mm.
Song?
Also have cried to Monica. Someone said Monica, but like Angel.
Monica was on the tip of my tongue for sure.
You want to catch me crying? I'm listening to that song.
Yeah, it was gonna be Whitney Houston, but she said band and I got thrown, so
Sorry. Maybe artist?
yeah. Pink.
I haven't thought about Jewel in forever.
Okay, Lionel Richie.
Shout out to all the alternative rock folks in the comments. If you don't know, we're giving away tickets to the Warp Tour, which is going back, which feels like an appropriate time to plug that, given that I haven't seen the name of all of these bands in a while.
I mean,
Prince. Absolutely, Prince. Absolutely. There's a Prince song for every occasion.
There's also a Prince episode of New Girl because he was such a fan that he asked to be always know. And they wrote him a whole episode.
One of my favorite memories is going to see Stevie Wonder at Madison Square Garden, and Prince comes out and does the bass line for Superstition and then walks off. I was literally I think I blacked out. He walked in, and then he walked right off the stage. I blacked out.
Oh my God.
When I tell you, I could just spend the entire hour solely responding to people. But I'm typing right now because multiple people have said Cartel, and it was my first concert. My sister went with me. I wore my little what was that brand that had the monkeys everywhere? Or like that skater brand at the monkeys?
Sun.
Yeah, I will remember the monkeys.
Aeropostale.
Oh, it's so many good ones. But I wore that to the concert, and I got to meet the lead singer, and my poor sister had to go listen to this with
Paul Frank. I was like, it's Paul Son of the Day.
There's Paul Frank. Oh, somebody met Paul Frank. Oh, wow.
Oh my God, Black Sun still exists.
I'm dying. Should we get started before we spend an hour?
I know, there
Still exists. Everyone in the chat, please keep this going. We are giving away tickets to the Warped Tour. You just got to book your demo and you could be entered to win them. And there's also a travel stipend with them. And big thanks to my friends at Hi Bob for seeing the vision and understanding what I'm trying to make happen for HR people. Keep the chat going because I'm going to review this later to go re-listen to all these bands. Here today to talk about HR's warped reality. Get it? Warped Tour, warped reality. When policies don't align with your people first values. I think a lot of us are experiencing a new and different world the last few months, especially in the States, where a lot of policies being passed and discussions being had are very much in conflict with our internal values. So we wanted to have a very open and vulnerable conversation about what does that mean for all of us in HR? Because I just feel like since January 20th, I've just been having whiplash every day with thinking about how do I continue to show up and support my people and what is happening in the world. So we'll get into that today, and I don't want to belabor that. But here's what we're going to do, the rundown. You're going to meet the cast, my two brilliant friends that are here. We're going to do Dear Hibba and Friends, inspired by Dear Abby. We're going to take live questions. So if you see the Q&A bar in there, you can actually put questions there. And then we'll talk about what's next. And I'm moving a little fast because I want to get to all these great questions that I have lined up. But before we dive in, it's being recorded. Nothing of your personal will be anywhere. No one will know. The chat is a really fun place to be, but I also make a call out that is also very distracting. If you cannot look at that and engage, just please minimize it. And the last 20 minutes will hopefully get to all your questions that you have. Okay, now who is here with me? Sarah, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Reynolds. My pronouns are they and them. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at the HR technology company HiBob, partner of Hibba and Workweek, and also the sponsor of the aforementioned Warped Tour tickets, which I personally am very excited for. I hope to see you in the pit. In addition to my day job, I'm also a DEI consultant. My practice specializes in things that are near and dear to my heart, including LGBTQIA plus inclusion and supporting colleagues who are transitioning in the workplace. So thank you so much for having me.
I'm so pumped to have you here. We've had so many good offline discussions, and I'm just like ready to bring this online. And I will stop making corny references now. Tara, thank you. You.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tara Haynes. I am the CEO of Equity Activations. It's my own company or consulting company. After I was laid off a year and a half ago, to be honest, I was overseeing talent acquisition as well, DE&I, and found a need to help companies embed diversity, equity, inclusion of all different social identities into their business practice because homogeny doesn't work as a business strategy. And so therefore the world is changing and you should be prepped for it. And so I just try to make sure that we are helping from embedding the practices into each of the operations of the company. I'm also a playwright, as Heba knows, as well. And my worlds converge sometimes. I like to talk about how theater also is like the workplace on my TikTok. But yes, connect with me. And I'm so happy to be here.
So happy to have both of you here. Not a theater kid, but lover of all things theater. I'm Hibba Yusuf, your host. By day, I'm the CPO at Workweek, which is a creator-led media company, and by night, I create content that all of you hopefully love. I am an emo kid at heart. I grew up going to Warped Tour. I think music has taught me how to express a lot of my feelings, and also I just like actively cry to music all the time. My playlist, Screaming Into the Void, has a lot of punk pop on it. So if you are a fan of like early 2000s punk pop, you should definitely listen to that playlist, and I'll probably share it later. And I'm really excited to get to this conversation today. So without further ado, welcome to Dear Hibba, Sarah, and Tara, our questions. And the first one we'll dive into is how have recent political decisions or legal changes directly disrupted workplace cultures? Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think that there's like a couple of answers to this question. The first is probably obvious, which is with executive orders changing the face of the conversation about DEI, a conversation about whether DEI is illegal and all of the pursuing court challenges and like reallowances and challenges again and all that fun stuff that's been in the news. That has certainly been something that a lot of organizations are looking at their legal stance around. And ultimately, that obviously has an impact around culture. If previously, for example, you had a very strong focus on DEI in your culture, and now it's something that you have to back away from, either because of very real concerns about, your federal contractor status, your federal grant recipient status, for example, or perceived concerns about like social pressure. A lot of companies are kind of doing an about face when it comes to DEI. But it's not just the conversation about DEI that is, I think coming up for folks. There's also a conversation about like immigration in the workplace, like what happens if ICE comes to your workplace. Again, something that's changed dramatically under the Trump administration and certainly has made a lot of the news. And then lastly, I would just say like, I'm non-binary, I'm trans, I'm openly trans in the workplace. I'm not okay. Like, I'm not okay. My colleagues are not okay. Whether you identify as LGBTQIA plus or trans or a member of another traditionally marginalized group, or you feel targeted in any way, you probably haven't been okay for a while, and you're probably concerned about things that are like fundamentally different than a lot of your colleagues. I have friends who are, considering relocating out of the US. I have friends who are pursuing second parent adoptions because, they need to make sure that both parents have a legal relationship to the child that they share, right? I have friends who needed to change their documentation before Biden left office in order to get a passport that matched their gender presentation. I have lots of friends who can't leave the country right now because their immigration lawyers have told them that if they go, they're probably not going to be able to be let back in. It's a really challenging time for lots of different groups in the workplace. And that means that while a lot of folks want you to be business as usual, it's basically impossible.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ugh, all of that. Tara, do you want to?
Yeah. Plus heavy, heavy check mark to everything that Sarah said. But I will also say I think that if we go back a little bit, it's not even just recent political decisions, it's been politics in general. And a lot of companies have been acting as though there's a separation of politics at work. We see it on LinkedIn all the time. We have a lot of people who will comment and like, this isn't Facebook. And I think, one of the things that really impacted me many years ago when I saw Michelle Mijong Kim, who is author of The Wake Up and a really incredible DEI voice in this world said at a culture conference when I just started doing this work, many people are pretending that they're not affected by what happens in headlines, but we can't compartmentalize ourselves at all. So we have always been impacted politically. If you even think about all the social identities, race, ethnic, all across the board, we have been trying to fit into a monoculture for a long time. And now it's getting extreme, but know that we've always been impacted by all the political decisions, whether you go back to Roe v. Wade, you go back to, one of the most recent ones where now, segregation has been removed from federal workplaces. Um, it's mind-boggling, but I think that there are people who have been able to walk around in their lived experience, not understanding the ramifications of anything that happens politically. But our government is a workplace, so why would we not be then affected by all of these decisions?
Yeah, the overwhelming like don't talk about politics at work or Sherm's infamous return to civility and civil conversations, I think really just irked me, and I'm just still not happy about that because I'm like, you can't tell us not to talk about the things that are very much impacting how we show up every day.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of HR people, like how it's disrupted just our cultures as we're navigating this world and this rules, like we have to be even more informed now. Like we already had to be informed, to be clear. Now we have to be even more informed, I think. And I think it's adding another extra layer of empathy that we possibly already had, but now we're having to be extra empathetic because our employees are experiencing this world outside. We can't protect them from what's happening outside, and that does impact how they show up at work. And so I think, like, those decisions are said, I think, in sometimes very flippant ways or, from uninformed people, and they do directly impact how all of us, including each one of us, shows up too. And I
Totally.
think that's just it's been I mean, if anyone wants to talk, it's been tough for me. The last few months have been really hard. The last year plus just seeing what's happening in the broader world has been, like, incredibly complicated for me personally, and there's just so much to be said that, like, there is something happening every day that will impact somebody at your workplace,
Mhm.
truly every day. My next question is really talking about those laws. So when those external laws, and I literally point outside, like I live right outside of DC. So like I'm literally pointing right now to them. When those external laws to those people making those, not me, those
Over there. Mhm.
when those external laws contradict our internal values, how do you decide what your company will stand for and what you'll stay silent on? I think this is like a hot topic amongst HR people.
It is. I'll go. I think that One, I think companies really need to understand what they do stand for. I think for a long time, those practices of finding our mission and core values were kind of messy and performative in a way where it was just like you say, the Franklin Covey things rather than actually like, what do you really care about? And what is this company connected to? I just don't think that people were successful at really articulating what they do stand for. And so everything after that, if it's based off those mission and core values, is going to be messy because you weren't really good at the what you stood for in the first place. But I also want to hold space for the companies that don't have the resources to be loud and to fight what's happening that affects their people. They're really just trying to, this conflict. Can I still have a business? Or do I just go hard and risk being targeted by the government? Like, this is wild that we're talking about this in 2025 in the United States of America, but this is a real decision that some business leaders are having. They don't have the resources to fight against what they see happening in the world, and they really kind of want to make sure that they have a company. And so I think a lot of times if you're able, and this is what I talk to my clients about, if you can embed the work, I don't need a press release for you doing something amazing. I think we talked about this before. Like, if you think about the Black Lives Matter movement, no, none of us asked for a black square. That was not going to help us in terms of the inequalities that were happening in the workplace. That was very performative. So I think it's really helpful for companies to decide what is going to be helpful to the people that I have and to the company that I stand for, and how can I do this even if it's temporary. Let's just not be loud, but let's make sure we have pay equity across the board. Let's make sure that we're auditing our processes. We don't have to be as loud, as other places. And there are private companies, and we were talking about this before, private companies that don't have to make these decisions, who are Target issuing a press release that we're taking away DE&I. Okay, what? Why did you need to let us know that? You know what I mean? That's so performative. I really just want people to think about what's going to move the needle, right? And I think that that's really important for them to kind of, and you have to decide, every company is going to be different. So, I really want us to focus on like not being performative and being, productive, proactive.
I love being
In
productive, not
addition,
performative.
sorry, totally. I'm gonna put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I think in addition to what you were saying, like, I think there's some fundamentals to knowing what you stand for that we should maybe unpack just for the sake of all the folks who are really trying to tackle this day to day. Like, first of all, know what you stand for. If you feel like the values that you have are not necessarily representative of the real life inside your organization, this is doubly important. But I would counsel everyone to do it, which is, before you make decisions or take action, number one, like, talk to your legal counsel about what you can and can't do. There's plenty of things that you still can do. We are still required, for example, to offer equal employment opportunity under the law. DEI might be a turn of phrase or an acronym that is getting a lot of political attention right now. So your counsel might advise you that, the term itself is the challenge, not the work. But get in front of your general counsel, like, get legal advice from your company on what exactly you can and can't do, and don't over rotate into just the can't. Ask them how to get to yes. The other thing is to double down and make sure that you are talking to your leadership team about, are these our values? Do we really stand for these things? Do we really know what they mean if we're saying that we're standing for them? Because if your legal counsel says, hey, you have a lot of latitude, you can keep doing all of these things, but your executive team is like, I don't know that that's actually what we want to do in the current modern era. Like, try and understand sort of like where the rubber meets the road on your articulation of your values. And I think the last thing to talk about is, talk to your board, because oftentimes you can get alignment between the people function, the marketing function, the PR function, and even internal executives, and get a sense of like, okay, this is what we can do, this is what we want to talk about, we don't want to talk about, this is how we want to approach things. But you might find that your board has a different point of view. And if your board is made up of your investors, they may have a very strong vote in this conversation. So if your CEO or your legal counsel isn't involving your board in trying to figure out, how are you approaching this challenge, I would definitely recommend that you do so. I would also say that, like, you should focus in this moment on what you can do even if it's silent, it doesn't have to be loud and performative. The work is so much more important than the statement of the work, right, for public consumption. And, you should also think about, I'm a marketer by trade, right? Like brand is an important part of the conversation. If you can continue the work, like is calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion as a program a hill, as Hibba would say, that you're willing to die on? Or are you okay if you call it something else, or you talk about your underlying commitment to those principles, but you don't call it a DEI program? I know a lot of folks have gotten the sort of like counsel, especially in the last couple of weeks with all the movement and executive orders around DEI, that just call it something else, call it an equal opportunity program, call it equal employment opportunity, use the terms of the federal government that they're comfortable with. Just don't call it DEI, especially if you fall into to those groups like federal contractors, federal grant recipients, et cetera, who need to be really careful about, what they're saying and what they're committing to, whether internally or externally.
All of that plus one, like, I don't care what we call it, I'm still gonna do the work. Like,
Mhm.
the terms are helpful for, like, people who need to understand things, but, like, I'm still gonna try to do the work and explain the work in the way that I think makes sense to, like, me and the people I'm doing it with. But the other interesting thing about this, Sarah, and, like, sparked for me as you were talking, there's that thing where, like, they were talking a lot about Gen Z and how Gen Z, like, really wants their company to, like, stand for something. And as you
Yep.
were talking and saying that, like, talk to your executives, talk to your board, I was really just thinking, I would have to go through, and we're like a small 55-person company, like, we have a lot of communication, but I would probably have to go through like 5 to 10 stages before I could do something like that. And so now you're looking at these like massive companies who have like fiduciary requirements to people, like to their shareholders. And then you're looking at a generation that's like, well, I want my company to stand for something. And like, I do agree people should stand for things, but I'm also putting my HR hat on. I'm like, that feels impossible sometimes to get that alignment. Like,
Well, but it is possible because you
but
have companies like Delta or Costco or Apple, that like huge employers who are going through the motion of, no, this is an important thing that we are committed to. It's the thing that underpins our business success. And we're gonna, when there's like a shareholder challenge or, something that causes the discussion internally, they say, no, we're doubling down. And I feel like, if the biggest companies in the world, some of the biggest companies in the world,
yeah.
can say, actually, this is really important to us, actually, this is what drives our business success, then even though, yes, it will absolutely be complicated, and I promise, as someone who's done this work, you will have to talk to way more people than you ever wanted to, and you will probably have to hear some very bad opinions. Is possible to get through all of those layers, even in some of these giant organizations. So for my clients who are SMB and mid-market, especially with everything that's happening in the world, I see a lot of folks actually doubling down on both the work and the way they talk about the work publicly, because they think about how it distinguishes them as like an employer of choice for all of these candidates who are looking at the actions of these very large public companies who are maybe not the Costcos or the Apples or the Deltas of the world, who are saying like, actually, we're walking away from this. And they're suddenly saying like, actually, I don't know that I see myself represented here, or I want to work here anymore. And they're looking for their next opportunity. So it's a bit of like, what do you, how much is this worth to you? Like to say,
I mean,
do you want to jump
Yeah,
through
it's like,
the
how much is it
conversation?
worth to you, but do you also have the money? I tell clients all the time, your consumers are your candidates and your candidates are your consumers. And one of the things that we're seeing in this market now is that people have a long memory for each of them. Like if
Mhm.
you get, and from a talent acquisition perspective, I always think about this, your employer branding. If you can afford, right, to stay homogenous and stay silent and stay quiet, then you have to stick with that. Like, go ahead and do that. I'm not going to convince you otherwise. I have my energy is best spent elsewhere with companies who are saying, I just want some help to figure this out. But you can't treat these two groups as though they are siloed or separate anymore. You know, if I speak on behalf of the 92%, these Black women who are exhausted, tired, we feel like we did a lot. Are we ever going to be applying for roles at Target? Unlikely, right? Are we going to be for applying for jobs at Le Creuset? Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? Like we will remember. The cultural zeitgeist is very close, and it's closer than I think than businesses realize. And I don't know that they stay connected to how we're talking about these things. Social media, publicly, whatever. Everyone seems to think we're all siloed. And again, none of this is compartmentalized at all.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, I gave you my fear, Sarah, and you were like, "No fear. Here's other people doing it." So
You can do it.
I didn't plant that. Everybody watching, I did not plant that. I was like literally just expressing this here because then the flip side of it is, and I don't want to ask this question just yet. Maybe we'll get to it, but like, then what is actually stopping companies from continuing to commit to their commitments? Like, where there's that whole time after 2020 and the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everyone being like, we're going to fix this, like Black Lives Matter. And then we look at the progress made in the last 5 years, and all the studies have shown like not progress has not been made. Like no more funding has gone to women or underrepresented groups. Like we don't have more Black executives. So is it, I'll ask a simple question. Was all of that just performative?
Well, I think that most of it was clearly undefined. I don't know that we ever collectively defined what our goals are. What were we doing this for? And so if you can't collectively define, I'm saying the whole words out loud, diversity, equity, and inclusion, just to find out what people are have beef with. What part of those did you have a
Mm.
problem with? And what does it actually look like to have an equitable company? So and unfortunately, some of these companies hired DEI consultants who actually had no idea what this looks like. Like Bo Young
Mhm.
is one of my favorite people to follow, but she posted a whole list of what this looks like. This is analysis. This is organizational psychology. If you can't get into Google spreadsheets and understand like what these reports from a demographic standpoint, what marketing looks like, what does equity actually look like? It's hard work. It's not just book clubs and panels. Like it really is about like how are we combating systemic inequity within a company. I think there are a lot of leaders who did not want to put that work in. I think they really just wanted to, pacify people and they themselves. I don't know if it's performative, but I think they really could not envision what does success look like when we roll this
Mm.
program out? What are we actually building towards? And I think that that was a huge problem that started, and that's the reason why we're kind of in this mess right now.
I
Okay.
I will give a lot of folks the benefit of the doubt that you're giving them, and then I won't give it to everyone because I do think that there was an element of this that was performative, and I think that companies who never were committed to the work in the first place, they were doing it to placate shareholders, societal pressure, conversations internally. Like this is a very easy out to say, like, "Whoop, like, can't do that anymore." Like, "Oh, bummer," you know? I will say on the flip side though, as somebody who like transitioned at work very publicly around the same time, I have felt a change in the actual like groundswell of the way that people talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It doesn't always come from the top. That's why I describe it as a groundswell. But I think, whether you attribute that to like societal conversation evolving or other things. I think prior maybe to the Trump administration, you had seen a lot more people who were like getting more comfortable with these topics, who were willing to engage in the conversation, who were, who knew what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging meant to them, even if they didn't know what it meant to an HR or a DEI practitioner, and they wanted to be part of the conversation. What I have seen, since the inauguration, especially, is like that there's a loud and very vocal minority who suddenly feels that they have permission to say the quiet part loud. Whereas I think the groundswell that was occurring, previous to this maybe like kept some of that under wraps. And I think that's something that as HR practitioners in the workplace is like what's creating this like powder keg for many folks feeling like they have employees who are at odds with one another, feeling like, they don't want to talk about politics in the workplace, or feeling like I just don't want to touch these topics with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah. And we're gonna get to that in our next question. I'm keeping us on time because I want to get to live. I feel like live questions are gonna be juicy today, so I'm trying to get us there. But so then, how do these HR leaders actually meaningfully advocate for employees when they're dealing with these external forces? It's really, I'll be candid, like it's really hard to show up and advocate for these things when everyone outside is yapping and trying to control the conversation and distract the conversation. When you're like, I'm trying to focus on the work that is impacting these people who show up every day.
I would say like a really practical tip is like look at your employee handbook. Does your employee handbook do things like specifically say that you do not permit discrimination based on a variety of factors, including, for example, in my case, gender identity? Like, if it doesn't, can you update it to say that? Because that supersedes anything about, whether the EEOC is prosecuting complaints based on, LGBTQIA plus employees, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I think if you have a really clear policy internally, if you know what you stand for and it aligns with your values, to have a really clear policy internally to say we don't permit harassment, we don't permit discrimination, right? Then you have something that's very clear to point to. I think the follow up to that is make sure that if a situation does arise, that you actually hold true to the policy and you understand that you will have to, actually demonstrate living that policy out loud, which is why all these conversations to start with are so, I think, important in organizations. But, you have the opportunity and the power, quite frankly, to make a lot of internal decisions that will actually create a situation or a workplace where you're doing things like creating psychological safety for your employees, where you are offering them, equal treatment or equitable treatment, I should say, where you are like really focused on the things that matter and where you hear their concerns as they come up. So think about what you can do maybe and not just what you can't.
Yeah. I'm going to add to that and say that don't be afraid to be vulnerable. I think, we see this modeled right here, but I think a lot of times leaders feel like they have to be stoic or, know everything in the room. But when you are clearly affected by something, it humanizes you. Like we think about people, departments in HR, like, everyone's like HR is not your friend and all of these different things. It's always we are considered to be in a department of no or executors. If you show a little humanity and really kind of embed that into how you operate and how you're dealing with people, doing like these little check-ins on one-on-one, like spot check-ins with people might be the most vulnerable or not at all, but like if you have an ability to create that, what like Sarah said, that psychological safety where that department then becomes the place where you feel safe and you feel like you can talk a lot about these things, because the navigation for sure is something collectively we can figure out, but you also want to make sure that the department that you have has that kind of branding where it's like we are going to figure this out, right? Together, collectively. Everybody knows this. And I think it's going to be hard too because we forget that we're human, right? We all began this with our own personal connection to what's happening in the world. And I think there are some HR leaders who don't do that. And so that makes it very challenging for people to feel like I can go to HR and talk about why I'm scared or how do I navigate some of the things that are happening here because they don't seem to be affected by any of this at all. So really just kind of bringing that sort of personal connection back to your people, even though it's going to be an emotional, like it's emotional and it's really hard, but we're supposed to be a community. We're not a family at work. We're a community of people. So how do we lean into that?
Yeah. I just think you can't not do anything. Like if you were just showing up and you were saying it's business as usual, I'm concerned because it's not business as usual for a lot of people. And I think like advocating, I think scares a lot of people because they think like, oh, it's going to lead to conflict. Oh, it's going to lead to disagreements. And it's like Sarah said at the very beginning, advocating for employees can be something as simple as looking at your handbook and adding language to protect them. It can be really small things that you do every day that swell and build like a bigger force that they know that they can trust you, that you are advocating for them. So that's just something I think about. It's like I'm gonna continue to do these little things and build like something so much bigger every day and it'll swell and it'll add. So I will add that. I think the next question I'm super excited to get to, mostly because I feel like all of us have been here. Have you experienced internal pushback when you're addressing external political issues at work? How do you decide when to speak up versus when to stay neutral? Oh, this is a heavy
How
one.
long you got?
Sorry. I'm sorry.
I said, how long you got?
Exactly.
Could do a whole hour just on this one.
Think I mean, the answer is obviously yes, if my, sort of sarcastic response didn't make that clear.
I do.
I think that it's obviously yes in the hierarchy of people that I just described that you need to go and have these conversations with. A lot of them don't look like me or like any of the panelists sitting here. They don't come from the same lived experience or professional experience. Their relationship to work or to the business's success is really fundamentally different. The way that they're compensated, the things that they're compensated on are very fundamentally different. And I have heard a lot from folks who don't look like me that they don't want to talk about politics at work, or they don't want to, like, in marketing, right? I often talk about these inclusive marketing topics as like audience widening. Like, I'm trying to make your product, your service, your company, your solution appeal to more people by like wrapping my arms around them in an inclusive way and speaking to them or showing them representation of themselves using the product, or, using language that represents them, right? But a lot of people see saying anything as an audience, like, I don't know what the opposite of widening is, like shortening, condensing, like maneuver, like slimming maneuver. Like, if I say something, then I run the risk of pissing some portion of my audience off. And I think, when I experience this from a marketing or communications perspective, like, I talk to them about, like, do you know how big that audience is? Like, can we have a conversation about numbers as to like what the demographics of your buyers look like, what the demographics of your workforce looks like in this case, if I apply it right to your employees as opposed to, consumers of your product or your service. I have definitely, there's definitely, I think, like that angle of it. And then I think there's just the angle of like, I'm Sarah, noted trans person. And, there's the issue of like folks feel like me talking about my identity and doing the things that some folks are calling out in the chat, like being open about my vulnerability, or being open about how maybe like our stories are not the same, but they rhyme. When I'm talking to a group of employees, I don't expect everybody to have the lived experience of a non-binary or trans person, but you probably have an experience where you felt like an outsider, and, I want to connect with you, or I want to be vulnerable to say I don't know all the answers, but, this is what I do know is important to me. I think oftentimes like folks are sort of characterized as like almost like the identity is politicized. Like, if I talk about being trans, then I'm entering a quote unquote political discussion because of everything that's swirling around outside. And so I've definitely experienced the pushback of like, can we do the webinar, Sarah? Can you do the introduction to this client and just not say your pronouns? Can you just not talk about how this impacts you personally? Can you not talk about your identity at work? Can you not make it about your identity when you're engaging in these conversations? And I think that by far is the harder of the two to navigate, because it's personal, because I don't think that my identity is political, and because there's not like necessarily data that I can throw at it the way I can navigating the previous conversation to say, hey, this is the way the world works, or these are the demographics of my buyers or my employees, to be able to say like, actually, I'm catering to a majority, not to a, minority, for example.
Yeah, I'll say, for me, what's interesting, if you think about like all of the diversity, equity, inclusion leaders that were hired back 2020, as a Black woman doing this work, there was an assumption that there were certain social identities that I valued more than others, and this was absolutely not how I approached the work. That because my stance has always been, if we are fixing this for the person who's having the worst experience in this organization, everybody is going to benefit. So a lot of times, and I'll use an example, when we were all on Zoom because it was a necessity, there were a lot of leaders who were like, oh, people are turning their cameras off. And I feel like that means that they're not listening and they're not engaged. And I got into a really heated conversation, I will say, with one of our leaders. And this person was like, well, why do you care so much? It's not like this is like, race or gender. And I was like, this is a neurodiversity. This is a socioeconomic situation. People may not want you in their homes. They may be listening, but they are caregivers. They are, can't focus because they have a different kind of ability when they're in a meeting. Like, why are you making these blanket assumptions about people without any kind of facts? And because I'm a Black woman and because I'm very passionate when I'm talking about this becomes then she's being aggressive. And this stereotype keeps moving and moving. And I've tried to be neutral and I can't, because the nature of my work, I'm advocating for people within the organization. And what this makes me realize is there are a lot of people who are completely ignorant to how other people's lived experiences have them show up at work. And a lot of those people are leaders. And so sometimes they don't take the work to educate themselves. They make these very blanket, sort of statements about other people. And it's up to me to advocate for those people in the room that they're not in. Like, how else am I going to help you educate? And so the pushback is always something where it's just like, when you go to college for the first time, if you've done that, and I'm a first generation college student, so nobody told me this, but I lived with people, then I was just like, that's how you were brought up? That's gross, right? Like,
We don't wear shoes in my house. Like, we take the shoe off at the door.
you take the shoes off and that, oh, you don't clean the shower. That's great. Like the more you spend time with people, the more you realize that there are social behaviors and beliefs that you never encountered before in your life. The workplace for me is always the same thing. Like I encounter people and I'm just like, how did you get to that conclusion? And so like when we talk about
Why are you like this?
why are you who hurt you? Oh. When we get to these internal pushback addressing external policies at work, you realize we are at work with people who make up the world and they don't have the same experience that we have. And so like for me to be neutral is to be harmful. To be silent is to be harmful. I'm very much a Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, civil rights sort of, everything is critical. And so I have to be able to do that. And I always encounter pushback because it's just like, why is she so aggressive about this? Why was she so passionate about this thing that seemingly has nothing to do with her social identities? I'm not just advocating for my own community, I'm advocating for all of them.
Yeah, the system that oppresses one of us oppresses all of us. I feel like when I've encountered this, I've most often encountered it with like younger first time founders and CEOs who don't understand the importance of addressing something. And so I always come at it as like, let me explain to you why. And I've gotten the pushback like, well, if we address this, then we have to address everything happening. And I'm like, yeah, because guaranteed something happening is impacting your people at work. I always bring it back to, do you want these people to feel heard and seen? And if you think that they can just show up, chuck their identity at the door, open a computer and everything is fine, like that is unrealistic. Like that just is. And so I feel like when I've experienced CEOs telling me this, I always just try to lay out like, here's who this is impacting at our job. And then I've had CEOs be like, okay, we don't have to address that. Lo and behold, 48 hours after something, I get a complaint to HR. Why didn't you address this? And I'm like, "Oh, so now I'm responsible for it all too." So I feel like that was a big learning moment in the past where I was like, "Look, you didn't want to address it. Now look at the feedback we're getting." And I think if you can create that funnel too for your employees to come to you and say, "It upset me that you all didn't address this," or you create that like feedback loop, then I think when it comes time to advocate for addressing these things at work, if they're political, not political, things happening in the world, then you now have the data to show our employees actually want you to do this. It has them show up. They can better engage. They don't feel like you are ignoring them. So I think that one, and then I will. Sorry,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, you be proactive in understanding how and what are you going to say. Like you don't have to wait for the thing to happen in order for you to put a plan together. There are plans that you can put together on how we address things and what we will say and what we won't say. We all went through that in the whole like black box, blue blocks, social media, whatever. Like how do you want to show up? Figure that out.
Yeah, the best time to make a crisis communications plan is when you're not in a crisis. And friends, you can Google it. Like Google's free. Like I'm not that everything here is a crisis, but like to Hiba's point about being proactive, like
Yeah.
make a plan, figure out some of those questions when it's not like the heat of the moment if you can. And right now it feels like every day, every minute is the heat of the moment. But so you're gonna have to do it live. But like, take a second to have the conversation when you can like when as best as possible, you can turn the volume down on like, I have to get something out in the next 5 minutes. Otherwise I feel like I'm failing my employees.
Yeah. And then my next question is really around like, so we kind of talked about like pushback, but how do you actually prepare teams and leaders um, for this psychological toll? Like there is not a day that goes by that a leader doesn't tell me they're going through it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "You're going through it? I'm going through it." Like, I'm going through it very publicly. Like, my crash out is public every day where I'm like, "Do anything's happening. I can't handle it." How can we prepare teams and leaders? Because I just think this is hard. And values do feel like moving targets. Like, Are we going to commit to that today? Are we going to commit to it tomorrow? What does that mean? What's our North Star? I know a ton of HR leaders who are also going back and doing values work where they're redefining their company values because the toll is so hard on leaders and employees who are like, I don't know how to behave right now, which is wild.
One of the things we did when I was internal is we brought in a psychologist to give people tools to help with, in general, things that are happening in the workplace. And it was a regular session that we did quarterly. We were able to use some of the money that we had from, our benefits budget as well, because this is a workplace sort of thing and program that we did. And so many people attended to be able to get the tools from a psychologist perspective to deal with some of the stressors. We even had leaders who were attending these sessions. So, for me, it's a matter of like, where can we, kind of comb through what our budget is, what our resources are, and how can we put these things together to be able to service our people? Do you want to lean into your employee resource groups where you're, providing them opportunities to be able to come up with programs? You don't even have to do it yourself, right? Like you can collectively sort of go and come together and say, like, we want to help people deal with a lot of these things. Can we talk to our ERG leaders, and can we talk to other, people within the organization, your internal comms people? Like collectively, we can come up with some really great ideas. I just want people to think that HR doesn't have to be the only place where you figure these things out, because other people have great ideas as well. And so I will say, like, just I think, being vulnerable, saying the thing, going out there and crowdsourcing some solutions to the thing in the workplace is probably going to be best, because then people will tell you also what they need and you can figure out how to give it to them.
I love that.
I would maybe Yeah, definitely plus one to that. I mean, ERGs are such a fantastic like resource for your organization. I also always counsel folks like don't just show up with an empty piece of paper to your ERG and be like, "What do you need?" or "How are you going to solve the problem?" Because it's the same thing that you experience as HR, right? When your C-suite leaders come to you and say, "How are you going to fix this problem that I created?" Uh, Come with ideas and let them, bounce them around with you, or come with suggestions and let them say like yes, no, do this instead. Make it a dialogue, not a one-way ask, right? But I think the other thing to think about is like not to stereotype in your organization, but you have leaders and teams where they are experiencing these things live as, for lack of a better word, like targets of the discriminatory policies that are being pushed, or the like social language or the social tension that is happening right now. And you have folks who are less so. Maybe they don't experience these things. Maybe they don't have friends or family who experience these things. Maybe they are a member of the majority. Maybe they have a type of privilege that's very different. Think about how you engage like different folks in your organization differently, because the conversation that you're having, for example, with your ERG, or you're with a really diverse team who works globally, right? Where, like diversity, equity, inclusion conversations in the EU are very different than in the US, right? Like for them, DEI is not going away. For us, it feels very heated right now. Like think about how you're engaging different groups within your organization and doing different programming, or even just offering different. Don't necessarily need to single people out and be like, this is for you and this is for you. But some folks are going to benefit from listening circles and, tell me, allowing vulnerable or take advantage of an employee assistance program, maybe in your benefits package, to just say, here's someone that you can talk to. Here's some organizational psych resources that you can take advantage. Here's how you, a leader who's already thoughtful about these topics, can engage with your employees who represent members of these groups. Here's what to say if, Sarah's crying at work because of the latest like EO that just got published and is all over social media, right? And then there's folks who are on the other side of that equation where they're maybe really uncomfortable with the topic, where maybe they do need to start at a different level of conversation, where you need to maybe do more education about the fact that this is even happening, or the fact that some employees are specifically being targeted or may feel targeted, that these concerns are the things that live outside of, just your employees' relationship one-on-one banging on keyboards with the computers, right? I think that, being able to offer different varieties of programming and being able to navigate those conversations like effectively or to the best of your ability is going to make you sound a lot more um approachable to folks because you're not necessarily delivering like level 300 content to somebody who is at kindergarten, and you're not delivering kindergarten content to somebody who's at level 300. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It honestly shocked me when I went away to college that I was like the first Arab person a lot of people had met and the first Muslim person a lot of people had met. And it was just very interesting to me. Like one of my very closest friends, I was like her first not white friend. And I was like,
Whoa.
oh, there's like a lot. She grew up in, like, a very rural area that was, like, majority white. So, like, when she went away to college, she's like, "Oh my god, there are people that are different than me." When I think about that example so often in the workplace, because when I'm approaching my managers and talking to them, I always like to approach it from, like, curiosity, where I'm like, "Hey, like, someone on your team, like, here's some things that might be impacting them." And I always find it funny because some managers will be like, "Oh, well, I've never experienced that," or, "Oh, I just didn't realize that." And when you see the light bulb go off for some people and, like, yes, I don't wanna always be doing the work. I think people should also do the work to educate themselves. But I do think when we're trying to prepare teams and leaders, helping them understand everyone's lived experience is different. Like, I could say it a million times, and I don't think it would stick for some people, but I'll keep saying it because you need people to actually make the connection that not everybody experiences the world the way they do. And once that light bulb goes on for, like, a manager or a leader, then you can start to tune them into the empathy, like, start at the kindergarten level, people experiences are different. Then we can get to 300 someday, where you send them to HR therapy and say, "You need to learn." But, like, I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do to prepare your team here, and I always just like to start with, like, curiosity and awareness, where I'm just like, "Here's a thing you should think about," and then I see where it goes for them. Sometimes works, sometimes does not work, so I'm just gonna throw that one out there.
Yeah.
Um,
I
my
say that I say that, when I talk to leaders, I just go and I tell people, education in this country is not uniform, right? Like, we literally do not learn the same things by state, by region, by city. So, just imagine that. I could, because sometimes that helps leaders that goes, "Oh my goodness," like, they don't even realize that, like, we didn't learn the same things in grade school or in high school. What I learned as a Black girl in Detroit is gonna be vastly different from somebody who's in the middle of the country, right? Because yes, you don't even know about my history because it was important to cater that to the group that's in the public school system, which is what I grew up in, versus like what culturally is relevant or geographically is relevant. And a lot of times when I make that connection, they go, "Oh my gosh, like I never even thought of that."
It's actually my favorite
Right.
game to play with friends. I'll be like, "What did you learn in history growing up?"
Right.
And, like, the it's wildly different depending on where someone grew up. I'm like, y'all, it's public education." I'm
Uh,
terrified.
Somebody asked in the chat, like, what happens if the light bulb never clicks? And like, I just want to say, Hiba, you and I were recently on a panel. This came up as well. Like,
Yeah.
I always engage. I never judge anybody who doesn't want to be the person who educates, but I have the same experience just from being non-binary or trans. Oftentimes, I'm the first that you've met. I will answer all the uncomfortable questions that shouldn't even be asked in a work environment. I'm happy to do it. But I don't judge people who are on the opposite side. But I also have a policy that I very quickly disconnect when it feels like it's bad faith or when it's pretty obvious that the light bulb's not going to go off or when it does turn into like a political shouting match. Because I've had the experience of like one of my best like white cisgender straight male allies in the executive team was someone with whom the conversation about identity and DEI more broadly started with him telling me that microaggressions don't exist. And I said, Mike, that's because they've never been directed at you. Like,
Yeah.
of course you don't. Like, why would that ever be something in your lived experience? And ended with him, advocating for employees to share their pronouns on webinars and to talk about their identity and saying things like folks are bringing in the chat, like, I don't know how to talk about this, but I want to create the conversation in my organization. And I've also had the experience where somebody starts a conversation that you think is good faith and it slides into bad faith really quickly. So do yourself a favor and do your own psychology and your own emotional well-being a favor and learn, like, figure out when you need to disconnect because it won't necessarily always end in a light bulb going off.
I just realized that all three of us are probably first and onlys in workplaces on this panel. Like, that's wild to me. But it goes back to the King Torrin Ellis question of who's in this room, who's not in this room, who should be.
Yeah. I mean, my sister talks about this all the time, being like a woman engineer who wears a hijab. Like she's always the only in every room. And I think about that so often. Like, the light bulb doesn't go off for a lot of people. Honestly, I feel like we've lost critical thought as a society, but that's a conversation for another day. But like what Sarah said, yes, like you don't it is not on you to educate everybody. If somebody's not willing to do the work, that's on them. And I had a very close friend where I had been screaming about an issue for years and she never paid attention, then started doing her own research into the issue and came back to me and said, I'm your very best friend. I have failed you in life. I should have listened to you when you talked to me about this. And now I'm taking it very seriously. And I think like that's a best friend, right? That is somebody that like I put in the closest tier to my heart. And that person even needed time to understand why that issue was even important to me. And so, like, that happens in the workplace all the time. Some people do not, to be very clear, give an F about any of our existence, mine, Sarah's, or Tara's. And then they might never, but they should give an F because they have employees on their team who probably belong to one of those groups. Just saying. Okay. We have 5 minutes left and 2 hella juicy questions. If you could rewrite the HR playbook, in quotations, for this moment in time, what is one rule you would add or delete entirely? This is just my the quick take one. Do you want me to go first? I'm gonna say like, don't talk about politics at work because everything is political.
Yeah.
I mean,
That neutrality is brave, that neutrality is not communicating its own opinion, maybe. Like, I being neutral is also communicating a message to your employees, your consumers, your potential candidates, all of these other things. It's just as loud a message as saying something with a very clear point of view. So I would say, like, just think about neutrality as like the idea that neutrality is the best path forward would be the thing I'd take away.
I think I would say specificity will save you. Like, it's very important to define the terms that you're using, to not leave things open for interpretation if we're talking about like mission and values and culture and like what are these things actually boil down to in action. So being very specific is really critical to how we operate as a company. And I think HR has an influence there.
yeah, I was telling Sarah that last year at Transform, someone said on the stage, to be neutral is to be brave. And I've never been more appalled in my life. Like, truly thought someone could have slapped me and I probably wouldn't have been as appalled. Because I think of the Desmond Tutu quote all the time. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I think about that constantly. This is not a time to be neutral.
Or Zora Neale Hurston when she says, "If you are silent about your pain, then they will use it to kill you." Like that kind of all of that. Yeah, there's so many quotes that back that up.
I love that. And it goes to our last question because I feel like we touched on this. Is neutrality a safe stance or a dangerous one in today's climate? Let me follow that on with who gets hurt when HR stays neutral?
Who are we? It ain't the majority. It ain't the people who benefit from the system of oppression that's been put in place. It's not the people who already have the privilege today. Like, I don't know. It's just that black and white.
Honestly, everybody. Like even if you think you're removed away from the neutrality of it, eventually that neutrality is going to come and bite you in the ass at some point. When it's a cause that it really affects you and you get mad at people for not saying something.
That's the thing.
It's like the face eating leopards thing. Like
The leopards eating your face.
yeah, person surprised leopards eating their face after voting for the leopards eating your face party. Like, not to bring up an internet meme, but it is like that.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. And everyone in the chat seems to be saying that. Like, I just always come back to this. If one group is oppressed, we're all oppressed. Just because they did it to one group doesn't mean they won't do it to another group. And I think like that in a time when we should all be aware of what's happening in the world and have empathy, like that to me is so important. And I wish I could scream it at people all day long. We are coming up on we didn't even get to live Q&A. Actually, we didn't have many questions because we were hitting home on so many points. But a quick what's next. First of all, I just have to give a huge thank you to Tara and Sarah for one, being vulnerable, two, being so fucking smart about all these things and sharing your experiences, tips, and all the things. Like, I'm so grateful to know both of you and to like have you even show up today means the world to me because I think these conversations are so hard, but they have to be had. And if we don't have them, we're doing our whole function and industry and every employee we support a disservice. So thank you.
Thank you for the space, honestly. You could
Anytime.
not do that. You know what I mean? You could totally not do that and be silent and neutral.
I could, but unfortunately, I'm a loudmouth who can't shut the fuck up. So why? We'll be here anytime you need me to talk about things. Our next episode of HR Therapy will be the end of April. And then just some quick final takeaways. Thank you so much to my friends at Hi Bob. Without them, I could literally do none of the fun and lovely things I get to do. Sarah, you taking time, being the CMO, but also showing up and being so thoughtful about these conversations is truly so important to me. So thank you so much for everyone who attended, and Tara and Sarah again, and my friends at Hi Bob.
Hi, Bob.
And that is HR Therapy, everyone. I need sound
I
effects.
feel so much better already.
I don't know. I feel like I need to go get a good cry out. I'm not going to lie. We need to get a good cry out. Everyone's saying thank you. Everyone, thank you so much. We will probably end this. Sarah and Tara, I will see you all soon on the other side. Thank you. Have an excellent day. Bye, all.